Next guest, we've got Mike Yam from the Pac-12 Network. Mike, how's your quarantine going?
Isn't it weird? Like that's become the
Yeah,
standard question to everyone.
yeah.
How is quarantine life treating you? Look, man, I'm so lucky. I'm healthy. My family's healthy, so that's obviously first and foremost, and happy about that. But I got to tell you, Zach, I cannot wait for whatever the new normal is. As long as it includes me being able to go out and not freak out about someone sneezing about 10 feet away from me, sign me up for that, man. I am pulling hard for science and a vaccine to kind of get it going pretty quick here.
Absolutely. Yeah, I went to the grocery store last week and they had everybody wait in line because they had like a 50-person kind of, I guess,
Sure.
cap for let in. And then everybody lit in line. They had the people at the Instacart and then they had the people that were shopping and they were doing a one in, one out. And all of a sudden I see some guy walk out with a bag of groceries and I'm like, what does he have on his face? And it was a dirty sock tied around his face as a protective. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I can tell you the whole story. I understand exactly how this happened. He walked in with nothing. They said you need something. He took off his shoe and went like this. So it's a wild world we're living in.
You look, I get it. The protective gear is hard to come by. I think we can do better than taking off the dirty sock. And
Absolutely.
like, let's be real here. If you're going dirty sock like that, that's not like your standard little ankle sock. Like he's going like knee high tube sock, one of those kind of crazy ones. So that can't be all that good. You know what it actually reminds me of on a lighter note? So Ronnie Lott was with us at Pac-12 Network, and he's been an unbelievable ambassador for the league for years and years and years. But we got to do a lot of shows together. And at one point, Ronnie was wearing something, and we got our wardrobe room, and he goes, "Man, that actually would go great as a pocket square." And I'm thinking to myself, and a lot of our guys just use my stuff just because, I got a bunch of ties and, I don't take anything home. I just leave it at work. So next thing I know, we get out onto the set and I just said to Ronnie, I'm like, "Hey, just use whatever you want. It's not a big deal. Like, what's mine is yours. Just have at it. It's not like my suits or my shirts are going to fit them, but if there's a tie or a pocket
Yeah.
square that will, absolutely go have at it." Next thing I know, he took one of my socks because I have like these funky socks, and he used the sock as a pocket square. So better that than using that
Yeah.
as protective face gear, but immediately reminded me of that.
It's wild. It's wild. And then so I assume you've been watching The Last Dance because there's nothing else on except for news.
Yeah, what's been crazy about it, Zach, is those promos were running for a while, pre-COVID-19, quarantine, and all that stuff. I don't know about you, but every time it came on, literally would just stop in my tracks and just stare at the television like I was, a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old watching Teletubbies or whatever is popular for kids nowadays, but just mesmerized by it. So I was completely jacked up for it. I've absolutely been glued to the television. I think they've done a tremendous job, and it's kind of my heyday. Like I'm 38, so 90s NBA was something that I kept really close tabs on for a good stretch of time. And even watching these last episodes, I grew up a Knicks fan. So to see some of those moments was awesome, but knowing the end result of a couple of those playoff battles, not as much. Did you see the snippet, Zach, where they had Sue Bird talk about John Starks' dunk on
A
Jordan?
little bit like it was like a commercial kind
Little
of.
vignette.
Yeah,
Yeah, 100%. So immediately, like, I gravitated towards that just because she's 100% right. Like, if you're a Knicks fan, you hold on to the Starks dunk, knowing what ended up happening in the rest of that conference finals. But nonetheless, man, been glued, and I'm sure you have as well.
What do you think of Bill Wennington's facial hair?
Not for me. I look. I mean, you can see I'm letting the playoff kind of shave. It's got the 5 o'clock shadow going. I got a show for Pac-12 Network coming up, so I'll shave for that. But I can appreciate the facial hair. But I think Will Purdue, who's been a buddy, got it right, and that's just go the clean shaven route, man. There's nothing wrong with that.
Has there been anything that's really like caught you off guard that like either you didn't know or you're like, I can't believe this just happened or it happened 20
Um,
years ago?
Yeah, you know what's wild about it? I've been really lucky at Pac-12 Network. One of the cool things that no one actually sees because it doesn't make television is whenever we do a road show, I get to go and talk to journalism students on all of our campuses. And it's one of my favorite things to do. But I think back, I went down to USC years ago, and I was talking to a group of students that wanted to be sportscasters. And I dropped the name Sean Kemp, and I noticed that there was some blank stares. So as I'm talking, like I think I went back and I just paused like 30 seconds. And I said, hold on, like I just said Sean Kemp and I see a lot of blank stares. Do you guys know who Sean Kemp is? And it was mostly no's. And I couldn't get over it. I was like, oh my God, like I got old. And like, I get it. I haven't had a haircut in a while and there's more white hair than I'd like to admit, but I couldn't get over it. And I said, look, Sean Kemp is Blake Griffin, non HD television years before Blake, like freak athlete, unbelievable dunker. Like I think the best in game dunker the NBA has ever seen. And I said, just YouTube it, whatever. So last night when I was watching Last Dance, I had forgotten that Sean Kemp made an all-star team as a member of the Cavs. Like I remember him not being on the Sonics and him going down to Cleveland and the whole thing. What I didn't remember was him actually being on that all-star squad, which was just kind of cool. But there's been enough of those moments when you're watching and, like Rodman, taking a break, like you just revisit like the mini vacation in the middle of the season. Like you revisit some of those moments, which are always interesting, but always fascinated, man. My first television gig was at NBA TV, and that was, post Michael, and that was early 2000, like 2005, 6, whatever it was. And, you just think about the impact, at least for me, that basketball had on me personally. And then in my career, it's part of the reason why I'm a broadcaster, right? Because of NBA basketball. And to see the style of play, like I got to do a show years ago with Rick Mahorn on Sirius Radio, now Sirius XM Radio, and Horn was awesome. But to hear him talk about the physicality of the game and knowing that he was like part of the original Bad Boys and the whole deal, it was great. But then to see the footage again and just see how physical the game was back then and the evolution of the game, it's just a nice reminder that it wasn't all about threes. I mean, you see, Jordan in that one clip that they showed, I guess he had like 5 threes in the first half. Like, I mean, not for nothing. I mean, Steph Curry's probably done that, a gazillion times. Like the game has just really evolved. And I do miss the physical, Knicks fan, right? Like mid 90s, like I want to see dudes get beat up a little bit, right? Not physically beat up, but just that physicality of the game. I miss that a little bit.
I think I saw a wild stat about the Knicks a while ago. It kind of stuck with me because I thought it was bizarre. Do you know who the last two Knicks to re-sign after their rookie deals that were drafted by them?
God, the way you framed it, it makes me think that it's not obvious, and I got to go a ways back. Who got a second deal? Like I'm just trying to think of some Knicks draft. Like I don't think Channing Frye had got no. Yeah, what do we got?
I think David Lee and Charlie Ward.
Stop. Oh man.
Yeah. I saw I saw the stat. It said the Knicks have had more Heisman Trophy winners than NBA champions in the last 25 years. I'm like,
yeah,
wow.
I've heard that.
Yeah.
I've heard that one a couple times.
Yeah.
To revisit some of that stuff. What's crazy about that is Charlie Ward. I remember him being on those Knicks teams when I used to cover them when I was still in college. And yeah, I mean, great dude for sure. Look, I'm still a Knicks fan. I still root for him, but my fandom dialed down a little bit. It dialed down after working at NBA TV for a bunch of the years that I was there, and certainly when I was at ESPN, because you develop relationships with individuals, so you start rooting for players and maybe a little bit less of the teams, and certainly still root for the Knicks. But when Jeremy Lin wasn't kept in New York, it kind of soured me a little bit to the Knicks. So I still pull for him, but it's just not the same. It's just not the same after that.
I remember the best Knicks team I've ever seen. I remember because when they beat Boston, I think was that 2012. I want to say.
I think it might have been just a smidge before that.
Yeah, but like fantastic. I think it was Kidd, Melo, Stoudemire before Melo got there. Stoudemire, like I'm like, what are you trading for Melo for? Stoudemire's incredible. Yeah. Wilson Chandler gone. Gallinari, Mozgov gone. I'm like, what are you doing? But
it's a rough deal. I mean, even Amari, just freak athlete. Like I still remember when Marbury had gone to New York, and it's sort of like people think about this, or they don't think about it as much because the Yankees have had so much success in New York. In my opinion, New York's still a basketball town, and I know the Giants have won a Super Bowl, and the Yankees obviously have won some World Series. Unfortunately, my Mets, I'm like a weird combo of Mets, Giants, but besides the point, the Mets haven't won, and obviously the Nets have had some struggles over the years, but when the Knicks are good, New York's York's a basketball town. And I remember when Marbury got traded there, just how galvanizing that was for the entire city. And it was awesome. It was, obviously the proof wasn't in the pudding and they didn't win, but it did. When Isaiah pulled the trigger on that deal, it got the entire city to get fired up for that. But I mean, look, the Nets, early 2000s, right? You mentioned Jay Kidd, Richard Jefferson, those types of dudes. Like those were Kenny Martin, Jesus Christ. I mean, you talk about a freak athlete. Those were some really good basketball teams. And I think in some ways too, now we're getting really far down the line here and probably way off topic, but I do remember the athleticism, with RJ on a wing and Kenny and the things that those guys could do with, I'd argue Jason Kidd's probably top 3 or 4 point guard in the history of the game.
Wow.
With him there. Look, I mean, even the year that he didn't win MVP and Duncan did, like I thought Jay Kidd should have been the MVP that season, but that was a little bit of a precursor for what we would eventually see in terms of teams running up and down the floor like that. Those guys were awesome. Rod Thorne did an awesome job building that roster. Just short. I mean, you run into Tim Duncan and the Spurs, no shame in that, but just a flashback watching Last Dance, man. It's been awesome and much needed, to be honest with you, without live sports.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's been, I thought it was great. One, when they showed the whole thing with Rodman going to Vegas, I'm like, this is perfect.
Yeah.
This is perfect. I'm like, there's no way he goes for 48 hours. There's zero chance he's there. He's like back on time.
Not for others, man. If you're gonna go party with Carmen Electra in Vegas, you're not going back to your day job either for 48 hours.
And then when they were talking about Phil Jackson when he was like coaching like in Puerto Rico, and I'm like, wait a minute, we need something on this. Like the mayor shot a referee, and you just kind of just go on to the next subject. I'm like, we need a little more background. That's wild. But in terms of switching gears over to football. So a lot of Pac-12 guys, you saw their names get called early on in the draft. It's about a little over a week ago. But what do you think that Justin Herbert is going to give to the Chargers?
I loved it. I think what's abundantly clear, and we've gotten to know Justin the last couple of years, just at Pac-12 Network and being on campus. I think what people forget is the amount of coaching changes, right? I mean, 3 different head coaches between Coach Helfrich, Willie Taggart, and obviously Mario Cristobal. Talk about different identities that offense had to undergo, and yet his ability to strive. I remember being on campus when Coach Helfrich was there, and we were doing a show, and Oregon gave us 3 quarterbacks to talk to, and none of them were Justin Herbert. And then you just think about the progression that he's had in his time. And everyone knows the story. Grew up, obviously, going to the games and really close in Eugene to Dodson and being able to be around that program. He was living his boyhood and childhood dream. And now all of a sudden to see it manifest into one of the top quarterbacks in the entire country to be drafted by the Chargers to stay out on the West Coast, to me is awesome. And I think the other thing is people talk about, and I've heard this as a knock, 2 years ago, Justin obviously had an opportunity and he could have gone to the NFL 2 seasons ago and decided to go back for his senior year. And they were a 4-win football team. And then a couple years later, they're winning the Pac-12 championship and winning a Rose Bowl. And I think to see his development was really remarkable. Some of the throws that he was able to make. I saw one prominent, NFL mock, draft guy out there 2 years ago say, hey, Justin Herbert has got to improve his completion percentage. And in my mind, I just said to myself, like, you're not watching tape because there were so many drops. I think Oregon had it that junior season for Justin at like 52 drops or something along those lines. And I mean, like just deliver. I mean, I hate when the ball hits your hands, right? I mean, but it was like moments like that where if there was maybe some more complementary pieces that were at a higher level that season, that completion percentage would have been even higher. But the point is, I think it's a great fit, down in Los Angeles for a guy like that who has shown that he can be a leader despite what people are talking about, as this guy that's not vocal, and I think that was a knock on him. Mark Helfrich, I remember him telling me this story. He said there was a time where when Justin was in practice, he said, I would make Justin say something after every single play. The rule was Justin had to speak. And it could have been, hey, good job, or hey, nice catch, or anything. But he had to be vocal because he was a little quiet. And I think you've seen the maturity of a guy like Justin Herbert over the years continue to grow. And I think at that position, Zach, and you know this because you've been a sports fan your whole life and around a lot of these guys, people always think about the quarterback as this rah rah. It's like when you're the best player on a basketball team, right? Like you're considered the leader when that's not always as accurate. And I think in Justin's case, he absolutely was the leader of that team's offense and just didn't get enough credit. I also think about him as a person. We do before Pac-12 media days every July. We get the top 24 guys in the conference. They all head to Los Angeles and we do our shows there. And one of the cool things we do is media training with the players, and we just take them through, hey, what to expect the next day, and how to answer questions, think about your brand, think about things that you want to convey. And one of the exercises, one of my colleagues at Pac-12 Network is Yogi Roth, and he does a great job. We all kind of section off different pieces, and Yogi does this one exercise with them where he says, "Hey, write down 5 things or 7 things, whatever it is that you want in your life. I mean, it can be anything." And think about this: we've been doing this for a few years, Zach, and you can imagine, you get the top 24 guys, top 2 players, offense and defense, generally speaking, on a Division I Power 5 roster like the Pac-12. Every single one of those guys is going to go make money, NFL, the list goes on and on. And for Justin, his answer was so unique and so different, and it's always resonated with me. His selections were, I want to be a great husband, a great father. Of course, I want to play in the NFL. I want to go, I want to be able to fish, in my retirement, like things like that. And I just think about the maturity that he was able to display, and I'm so glad that he came back for that senior season, because I think he would have been behind the 8 ball, as I would say, for most quarterbacks that don't have that extra year of college reps.
And then especially look at who you're not rushing him into it. You got Tyrod there, who's been kind of like that fringe guy in multiple situations. He was there in Buffalo, He was in Cleveland, and you also have a great offense around him. He's not Tua in Miami, who's, I couldn't tell you who they got. Devontae Parker, he's still there, but you've got Eckler, you've got Keenan Allen, Hunter Henry, Mike Williams, and I don't think there's a rush. So I think it's a perfect situation.
Yeah, and like I think the point that you make is a really good one, right? Like it's great, and we've been talking about this because we do a podcast for Pac-12 Network, and we've had a lot of these guys on that have gotten drafted, and it is awesome. Who doesn't want to hear their name called in the NFL draft? Of course you do, but I do think there's something to be said for being an undrafted free agent. Where you get a little bit more control on your landing spot. Like Anthony Gordon comes to mind. I was shocked that he wasn't drafted, but he ends up in Seattle to play for Pete Carroll potentially. Like there are these spots where I think fit sometimes is going to be more important for not only your career initially, but even long term. I mean, think about this, right? Like Josh Rosen a couple years ago was considered one of the best quarterbacks that you could draft, and now we're talking about multiple teams. And I just think about fit, and he just never really was able to latch on in a system or for coaches that maybe saw what he was able to do and put him in a spot to succeed. And I'd say the same thing to your point on Justin Herbert. And I think it's a really good one. He's not going to a franchise that is in complete disarray that needs him to be Tom Brady 2.0 in season 1. Like he's going to be able to grow into that role a little bit. And I think that's going to be huge for his development.
And the one other guy I wanted to ask you about was Brandon Ayuk from Arizona State.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, I didn't really know much about this guy. And I'm like, wait a minute, San Fran is taking a receiver in the first round. What's going on with that? Well, and then they said he was their top guy on their board. How come no one's heard of this guy?
Yeah, freak athlete. And I think part of it has to do with the fact that N'Keal Harry was there the year before, right? So another first-round guy. It's back-to-back years. ASU now has put a wide receiver into the first round in the NFL draft. And Harry was such this physical freak and a specimen that was out there that sometimes you don't always think about Brandon Ayuk. I mean, Herm Edwards in that offense, did a great job making sure that their best playmakers had the ball in their hands. And 2 years ago, that was N'Keal Harry. Last year, in a lot of ways, it was a combination of Eno Benjamin, who was obviously also drafted by Arizona. But Eno was a game changer in that offense 2 years ago. And then last year, a lot of issues on the offensive line for ASU, really, really young O-line, and some guys that got banged up, and they were never really healthy for most of the season. But Brandon took a lot of pressure off of Jaden Daniels, who's their quarterback, and not to mention Eno. But there are things that Brandon Ayuk can do with the football when he's got an open space. And my Lord, man, it is jaw-dropping. If you would have told me, though, that Brandon Ayuk before the season would be drafted before Laviska Shenault, I would have said you're crazy. Wow. Laviska was as much of a freak at that spot. I mean, at Pac-12 Network 8 seasons, he is, and there's been some really talented wide receivers over the years that have been in this league, but Laviska is at the top of the list for doing maybe collectively the most special things on the football field, and the way that they get him the football. Coach Severini, who was calling plays for him last year, I mean, it was any way they could, they'd get him the football. So I'm thrilled for him that he lands a spot. But getting back to Ayuk, I've seen him do some things. It's those. Tell you what, if you're a linebacker or you're a DB going up against San Francisco, I just think about the physical punishment you're going to get from the complement of skill that San Francisco is going to throw out there. Brandon Ayuk is a big boy, man, and I would not want to be in a position where I got to try to tackle that guy.
Wow, and then there's going to be a nightmare for opposing defenses this year because you saw what they did last year.
Yeah.
And then speaking of Chenault, I know because he slipped because of injury concerns. Do you like that fit? He landed in Jacksonville, right?
Jacksonville, yeah. He goes to the Jags there. I mean, look, I think any team that gets him is a complete steal. I think Daniel Jeremiah, who does a remarkable job for NFL Network, I think he's the best dude that's out there with that coverage. But I want to say a couple weeks before the draft, someone told me, I didn't see it firsthand, but I trust the person who told me, said that he thought that Daniel Jeremiah thought Laviska was the best athlete in the entire draft.
Wow.
I mean, at his size, his skill, just think about the things that he was able to do. Now, I know the injuries are a concern, but look, he had a turf toe injury 2 years ago that he suffered at USC. It was at that game. Colorado was 5-0 at that point. They were the last undefeated team in the league when he gets hurt. There was conversations about Laviska for Heisman at the wide receiver spot at that point. He was working his way into that mix, and then he gets hurt, and then CU's season kind of just falls off a cliff, and they lose out the rest of the year. And then last season, the dude gets hurt with a core injury. Like this is not like these catastrophic recurring injuries to a knee or to a shoulder, like something that would give you reason to pause. He had a core injury that he had surgery on. I've worked with guys that have had that surgery that played in the NFL, and they said, look, he's going to be 100%. Turf toe, kind of a fluke thing. But if you saw Mel Tucker, who took over, he was there for just one season, obviously left the program at Colorado to take over the Michigan State job. But Tucker had said, hey, after watching the film, I see why Laviska was being banged up. I mean, they were trying to get him the ball constantly, and it made sense because of how great and talented he is.
And in Jacksonville, obviously Colorado, he's going to be all the attention is going to be going to him. In Jacksonville, that's not going to be the case. You got DJ Chark, you got a couple other guys. He'll be able to maybe do a little bit more, and when there's not as much attention on him, maybe he can really show maybe he was one of the steals of this draft.
Yeah, no doubt. And I'll say this, man, Jacksonville, I do, there's like this much concern that I have for Laviska because I do think he's got the potential of all the wide receivers taken this year. And there was a lot. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, that might have been the deepest, spot and maybe the most selections in terms of position. Maybe some of the big boys up front on the offensive line. I know a lot of those guys went. But the point is, I would not be surprised if you would have said to me, or you're going to say to me, hey, in 5 years, who's that one player that's going to stand out from this class? Laviska is going to be, at least for me, on the short list. I do worry about that organization and where they're at right now. It seems like it's a little bit of a transition. And that does concern me just in terms of his ability to produce.
Yeah. And then before I let you go,
yeah,
what's your timeline when you think we're going to start seeing some games on TV that are played in this country?
Oh, God, man, I wish it was yesterday at this point. Look, I think there's already conversations, right, with baseball. We're talking about, NASCAR and golf and the PGA. And, like, there's opportunities there. But if you're going to ask me about football, look, I know the NFL just released a schedule. Everything is as planned. I hope to God that is going to be the case, because I think the one thing, and you're a sports fan and you've been a sports fan for your entire life, man, it is I think we all miss it right now. Even if you are a casual sports fan, you don't have to be a diehard like me and you to kind of, want to see the games. I just, it's not apples to apples, and I don't mean to describe it this way, but I was in college at Fordham in New York City when 9/11 happened. And I remember being on campus and you could see the smoke from the towers, and it's ingrained in your head. Like, you just think about those moments and something I know I'll never forget for the rest of my life. And then you fast forward and I think about Mike Piazza and a home run. And I just think, like, that's the greatest home run I've ever seen. Like, I just remember going completely berserk as I was watching it. And I just think about the power of sport, right? Where it's able to unify, galvanize, and in a lot of ways help heal. And I think right now you're dealing with COVID-19, and every time I turn on the news, the death total, CNN, and you see that sidebar that they have there, and it's approaching 70,000 people who have passed away because of this virus. And I just think, my God, like, we are inundated with this coverage, and rightfully so, because this is a global pandemic that's affecting so many people, economies, businesses. People are out of work, searching for work. How do you pay your bills? Like, this is huge. But I do think all of us would really just appreciate and love, just give me a 3-hour window where I can just tune out for a little bit. I just want to cheer something. I want to see something positive out there. So as far as the timeline goes, man, I wish to God I could tell you. I do think that we will get some football this year, if I had to guess, and it's clearly just a guess. But the one thing that I will say is, whenever it does come back, I do think it's going to look different. And I don't know if that just means no fans, selected sections can be kind of like, blocked off, and you're just not going to see those crowds. And I think the players are going to have to go through daily testing. I say the same thing at the college level. Like, if you don't see kids on campus for classes, I don't know how you ask a student athlete to go and practice. So I think step one on the college level is, how do we make sure it's safe for the students on those campuses? Step two is, how do we integrate sports back into it? I think it's daily testing. And I think the protocol and the procedures around it have to dramatically change. So that's the longest winded answer to your question. But I guess the short answer is, I hope really soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Because sports, they give people, like, you kind of forget what you're doing, you forget your life when you're watching. It just kind of gives you, it's like a different world. So basically, it's the same thing that's going on Sundays with The Last Dance. For 2 hours a week, you can forget everything that's going on, and it's just something that's, and especially the thing that really got me was the Alex Smith documentary the other night on ESPN. Even though you see how much he struggled with all the different infections and surgery, I think that even though it's just a minor thing in terms of what's going on in the world, I think that inspires a lot of people, that if this guy is going through this much right now, I think I can stay home and wait until everything's back to normal. And I think that's good. I think it kind of gives people a little bit of a distraction, but it also gives people hope.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, that's the one thing, for as much as we love those in a moment celebrations and the drama that comes with winning championships, crucial games, whatever the case may be, I do think one of the best things about sports is this ability that the game and all these games have to inspire people, like you're talking about. It's the stories within some of these guys, the perseverance that these players have, the grit. I was going back and forth with a buddy of mine about the top 10. I mean, this is what it's come down to, right? Like, these text threads, top 10 quarterbacks, NFL history, go, and like, we were making this case, and, I threw Steve Young into the mix, and we are going back and forth on where I had him slotted. And I said, there's something to be said for the grit and the passion and his path, right? Like, he wasn't, this isn't the dream scenario. It's not like being Justin Herbert. I'm forecasting here. You first round pick, top 10 guy, the face of a franchise, balls out, and all of a sudden becomes, like, this GOAT for this franchise. Like, no, it wasn't like that, man. He was biting his lip and waiting his turn, sitting behind another historically, arguably the best quarterback of all time in Joe Montana. Like, those are the stories that I think people sometimes need to be reminded of, because you can take what's happening in those games and then translate it into your own life. Like, I think people who watch the Jordan, I call it the Jordan doc, but The Last Dance, and you see this passion that he has to be great. Well, how many people, Zach, will tell you, oh yeah, I want to be great too? Yeah, pretty much everyone says it. What's the percentage of people, though, that put in the work and are okay with being a little bit of a villain? I'm not going to be the nicest guy in practice. I'm going to push you, because if you don't do your job as well as I'm trying to do my job, we're not going to win. And I don't want anything less than 110%, 200% your max effort. And I think, for me, it's a good reminder. That's why I love a lot of these stories, and the things that sports teaches you growing up. Failure, it happens, man. It's okay. Like, you got to bounce back. I've had someone say this to me the other day. Hey, like, champions, like, they need to adjust. And right now, specifically for what is going on, we all need to adjust what we're doing daily.
Absolutely. Well, I really wanted just to thank you again for coming on.
Yeah, man, for sure.
And then, how can people find you on social media?
Yeah, for sure, man. At Mike_Yam, the Twitter handle, Instagram, those are kind of the two platforms that I use most frequently. A lot of Pac-12 content, a lot of basketball content, just for the love of the NBA, and we try to have some fun and try to take people behind the scenes, especially on our studio shows, the things that I'm working on. We try to give them a little bit of that look, and then of course on Facebook, just Mike Yam as well. So, but awesome to talk to you, man. Hey, look, anytime I can, at least see another human being, and I know we're not in person and it's via Zoom, but it's just nice to have that connection with people, because I'm in an apartment that's 700 square feet here in San Francisco. It's a little bit of a different deal. I don't get to go to Barry's and get my workouts in. So and get to talk a little sports. So it's
Absolutely awesome, man. Well, this has been awesome. But I just wanted to thank you again and stay safe out there.
For sure.
And to talk to you soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone wash your hands.
Absolutely. Purell. Go get Purell.